Welcome back to the Walton Supply Chain Center series on shelf availability. We're rejoining and continuing our conversation with Myron Burke, the CEO of Divergent Technologies.
All right. Good morning and welcome to Conversations on Retail. My name is Matt Pfeiffer, and we are so excited to continue Mike Graen's series focused on shelf availability. It is a soggy day in Northwest Arkansas, and we're back from a bit of an extended break from the holidays. And I know Mike has been traveling and hitting conferences and so forth, but we're super excited to be back. Mike's guest today is our friend Myron Burke. He's the founder and CEO of Divergent Technology Advisors, based here in Northwest Arkansas. And the two of them are going to be talking today about the impact of serialized items on retail supply chains.
No, it's not trivial, and a great person in this space. And you know him well, John Phillips. He and I used to have some just passionate conversations on this topic because, if you take, beverages like Pepsi or Coke or something like that, or bags of chips and snacks, the volume on those, it's tremendous. And the thought of serializing that, if I sell one can of take your favorite beverage, I sell one can a million times a day. Well, that's one line of data with a quantity tracker of 1 million on it.
Right.
If I serialize that, that's suddenly 1 million lines of data.
Yep.
If I serialize that by 20 different read points, it's 20 million lines of data, right? Or I've got extended fields in the database. They're smarter guys than me to figure out the database structure. But the multiplier is tremendous. But I don't need to hold that for a year. I might be able to look at ways to do hot and cold storage of that. I think this is where there needs to be a lot more mind exercises in it. But there's also things that start to happen with, hey, where does that stuff end up? Do I have people crossing, legal contracts on bottling rights and things that I don't have visibility to it today? So I think the use cases get very different as you move through different product codes. The complexities are very different based off volumes. And some companies do serialize, right? The TVs, the computers, the phones, Apple, Samsung, et cetera. They do a lot of that already. So I could link this serial number to my product manufacturer serial number, and now I have a direct correlation to all the piece parts. We've seen the airlines do some of this as well. Database architecture, I think edge databases are going to become a big thing in clearinghouses on some of these elements that says, when do I care about this? I think you'll see AI, generative AI, at the edge. This is a slow, methodical move because the data out there is not good today. But as the data gets better, the ability to put edge AI in a generative method out in space and start looking at the performance of serial numbers, hey, these are very consistent with a normal pattern. We can start to dump those into cold storage for 30 days. Hey, these are questionable. We want to watch this for a return at another store because it didn't follow the normal travel path. And then these are, hey, this is an alert. We need some sort of action. Are we triggering video to capture additional information here so we can build a case on a potential organized crime and tying that together? So I think the sophistication of that, what you see in retail inventory markets across all the activities that happen, and those are directly connected to the financial markets. I think you'll see the retail inventory markets start to mirror more of the financial traceability markets, because at the end of the day, the financial markets are a subset of what happens in some of these retail wholesale product markets. It's the asset that's moving and causing the financial ability. If we start tracking the asset, we can get more insights to the financial crimes that are happening in the background as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So practically, if I think about the way the retail supply chain works, items are set up, purchase orders are built. I need 50 of these, and I want them delivered to this location. That's at the UPC level. And then advanced shipment notifications are, I shipped the 50, and the invoicing, I want to be paid for the 50, and it flows through the supply chain. Now I've got this whole other piece of data, which is I have the 50 or 1 million Pepsi cans. I thought it was probably a better example. Does that go through traditional kind of EDI platforms? I've heard a lot about this thing called EPCIS from GS1. Practically, we have to way of be able to store that data and assign those attributes to it as an individual company. But more importantly, how do we communicate across the supply chain in a common way. Is EPCIS is the right way? Is EDI the right way? How do we think about that?
So that's a big question. I think there's some room in this space for some work groups. We have EPCIS, which can certainly do this. The problem is it becomes a lot more transactions, and you're defining where you want the serialized data in the man segment of the ASN. I think there's a lot more opportunity for machine-to-machine communication here that says, hey, here's your PO. We're saying it's full, and here's the serial numbers we read in that. Can the vendor-supplier relationship have a machine-to-machine view that says, okay, our machine's going to look at your finalized outbound bill of lading, and we're going to match our receiving invoice to that, and we'll get a green off of that match. So I can store it in a partner location. Maybe the vendor stores that record, and the receiver looks up against it. In a direct relationship, that works. In an indirect relationship, there has to be an intermediary that's capturing that. Maybe it's 3PL. But I think this is where groups like GS1 really strive in getting industry together to talk about, okay, how should this relationship work? Does everybody need a physical copy, or can we do virtual copy? And we work with virtual servers and virtual databases for a long time. So I think the Microsoft, Dells, Amazons of the world can play in this space as well, to help define, hey, what's the most efficient way to do this? And then sort of your business action groups start looking at it and saying, hey, financially that works, because we may do an assumed receipt anyway. So there's lots of things, depending on the contract relationships, that this can be done without having to replicate all that data at every location. Yeah. But there's a lot more to discuss there. I don't think that's a silver bullet that anybody has their arms around, because just not enough people are looking at it at this high of level.
Yeah, I know there was. I think you were involved as well. There was a major study by Auburn University several years ago called the CHIP project, the Chain Integration Project. And that it was a nice way of saying that there's a big bucket of money called claims. Claims are basically saying, I asked for 50 of these shirts and you only sent 40, so I'm going to claim, or I'm going to deduct that from my invoice. There was a product authentication. Hey, am I really paying for Nike shoes, or are these a ripoff, et cetera? It's potentially, pharmaceuticals. Is it really made from the manufacturer? Do I have that trust? And we really, I think everybody rallied around it. There were some huge numbers that were shown, et cetera, but I still haven't seen a real practical, hey, I am a retailer, I'm a supplier, I ordered 50 of these, you shipped me 45, and I can tell you that I didn't get them all. Well, yeah, you did. Here's the 50 SG10s that I sent you, the unique serial numbers I sent you. Go scan if you got them, you got them. I'm not paying the deduction, because the reality is you just didn't catch them on the read, but you did get them. So it's the ability to be able to, basically debate or throw data against claims or shrink or product authentication issues, et cetera. But again, we're several years in since that study, and I think the industry is still struggling with a way of doing this.
I think they're struggling. But I think, at least from my seat, I'm seeing companies actually want to study that. And I think this is, unfortunately, it's a topic that nobody wants to be public about. It's a little bit like inventory when we first started that in like 2007, 2005, because nobody wants to admit that there's inventory is 60% accurate, because how do I answer a question at a Goldman Sachs conference or to Wall Street about that number, because I don't have an answer. I think the same thing is, hey, I've got situations where the vendor intentionally shipped me short because it was on time in full or whatever it may be, and I'd rather have something there than nothing there, because I can't sell nothing. I can sell 70% of the order, and make up the difference. I've seen cases documented where, unfortunately, some suppliers or intermediaries have substituted a cheap product for a more expensive product and didn't change the box labeling or the bill of lading. And so there's 200 units of the wrong item shipped in the wrong box that are going to flow through a DC and down to the store. And now I've got 400 units of error because I'm over and under, right? So it doubles. And that was done intentionally. because of the pressure of business and a post-COVID supply chain. And it's like, hey, I think we can get away with it because we don't think anybody's looking. That's bad business in all aspects, but how do you find that? Well, it doesn't show up till it's at the store, and then we're post-auditing, and then are we going to open every box on every truck? Barcodes have got us to a place where we're not really wanting to do that. Serialization with EPC starts to give you the capability to do that free audit check and to do that green lighting of a PO and say, hey, this one's clear to pay, everything looks great, or hey, we're going to keep this one open on 5 units, so we'll pay everything but 5, but we've got 28 days on our terms to look for those 5. If they show up, we'll release the rest of the funds. If they don't, we'll file a claim. I think it makes business more transparent as to what's going on. And it's the pressure of human conversations that sometimes we don't want to have because we don't have an answer, that the data, like this data, serialized data at this level, can tell us, hey, we're just short, but we're working on it. Or, hey, we didn't see it, but we're actively looking for it because I've got a system that's actively looking for it. I'm not having to pull a cashier off a register to try to go look for something that they don't know where it is, which is sort of a failure task to begin with. So I think we're getting there. People are starting to wrap their head around it. I think, economics always play into this. You have to have some use cases and some audits on the ground to quantify that there's value there. I think CHIP started that. It opened the door. But then it's like, okay, well, which of these 5 issues that CHIP identified do I have? And some companies have 1 or 2, some have 5. But they've got to understand how good or bad they are in their own eyes and how they start to attack that without wrecking their company. So you're kind of doing open heart surgery on the company while the company is awake. And that's a sensitive space to play.
Yep.
And you want to be great, but you also don't want to set a separate precedent for yourself. And that's just the hard part about being CEOs of big companies. Sometimes you can do something that puts a target on your back. So I think this has traction over the next 10, 15 years as we look at the leverage from the data. Again, if you go back to the barcode, we're celebrating 50 years of the barcode,
yep,
which was developed to sell product.
Mm-hmm.
Look at all the things we do with barcodes, all the things in shipping and containers and tracking and medicine and documents and files and records, and now 2D barcodes and menus. Nobody thought we'd be ordering food off a 2D barcode at a restaurant, right? But we're doing it. So I think we're still learning things from the barcode. Serialization will be 50 years plus of learnings in a much faster timeline.
Yeah. I was going to say that's about the only thing that came out of COVID. We all learned how to scan a 2D barcode for a menu.
Yeah. Unfortunately now my TV screen's covered half the time with the QR code too. So
that's a good point. That is a great point. That's a great point. Well, we got a few minutes left, and we've had a couple of questions, and I think we've answered them. So I'm not going to go back into those. Give us the so what. I mean, what are the actual questions? What are the questions that I didn't ask that I should have? I mean, where are we going with this thing? Where do you see the next 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 years? I mean, you mentioned some of this stuff. What exactly should we be thinking about if I'm a retailer or I'm a supplier? How do I now I know what serialized data is? I know some of those potential use cases. How do I get involved to get more actively involved and start thinking about and actually implementing some of these solutions?
I think there's kind of a decision tree is starting to look at, hey, what are the biggest value points I can get out of serialization in my business, and finding those nuggets, sort of like companies did with sustainability, right? It took some pushing, and people found real value in sustainability at the economic level, not just the moral level of the company. I think finding those nuggets for serialization on both the internal operations and the customer satisfaction experience and sales side. Partnering with groups, GS1, having an active proponent in GS1, looking at the information, learning about that. I think learning from groups like Auburn, Michigan State, and others around these organizations that have labs that look at things in a very independent view, and talking with solution providers, like what are they doing, what are they offering, bringing to the table solutions, and what use cases can they share to get educated. And I think have a team that's on your tech side looking at, hey, if we move to serialization and keep the serial number in the event trackers, what do we need to do from a data architecture perspective? So the architect teams need to be really involved. And how do we best manage that? And then be able to recall that information for business value. And then start to think of it strategically. This is a transformation. It is not a project. You know, a lot of RFID things were, well, it's a project. We're going to put tags on product. I'm like, yeah, that's step one. Like, what are you going to do with it after that? That's the transformational strategy. So I think now that we have Sunrise 2027 and this becomes a barcode, RFID, other potential symbology capability, I'm looking at how do I put serialization to work in my business? The same way that companies like, you know, I think it's interesting because fast retailing's done some of this. Dillard's, they had a serialize, and others did this. They put these yellow stickers on that serialized the transaction. They scanned it after the sale. They scanned the G10 and scanned the serial number, and that was sort of their proof of purchase tracker, almost like a POS transaction log, and that gave them, you know, non-receipt refunds or verifiable of purchase. So I think they've done serialization in a way that's not connected to RFID or this GS1 Sunrise initiative, and they've done that for years. So I think there's companies that have done it and done it very well in a different way. It doesn't all have to be the same way, but once you think about serialization, you want to make sure you're reserving enough space for how big is the serial number on an RFID tag. Am I using the same serial number or something different on a QR code? How do I cross-reference those? Thinking about the architecture in a way that allows you to use that universally and then move faster than barcodes did into a machine-to-machine engagement. And then it becomes, hey, a business case for GS1 is, hey, you did chip. Now we really want to look at how do we reconcile this information and what's the most effective way to do that as subscribers to this industry standards organization. They're very responsive to business interest. And so if the businesses start showing interest in that, I think they can really accelerate EPCAS, which is a really big blockchain model, and other ways to do those types of active queries. But it's getting in the game and allowing people in your organization and challenging people in your organization to think about what would we need to do different systemically if everything we scanned was serialized.
Exactly. Interesting.
And I think that's the challenge question of today, you know, is to get people to start having that discussion in 2024.
Yeah. Yeah. Nope. I think that makes sense. I mean, and the early adopter of this, obviously from 2003, RFID as a technology sort of led the way because it almost had to be. If you're going to scan something, you got to have a unique serial number to know how many times did I count you. You can't just count UPCs because I'd never be able to do it right. But we still haven't made that leap from that to, we're sort of going up that pyramid to starting with inventory accuracy, then finding product in the store, then asset protection. We're still, for the most part, inside the store. Love to see us get into the upstream supply chain. That's what CHIP was all about. But unfortunately, we are not where I think, where I was hoping we would be. I thought we would be farther along. And there's some great companies that have worked on it. It's just hard. It's a lot of difficult stuff to get through.
I think it's hard. And I think when I look back at most of those programs, which have been great for moving the needle in the EPC RFID space, and some in the 2D barcode space. And I, full transparency, I sit on an innovation advisory board for GS1 still, and we talk about these things with multiple industry partners in the board. Is most of those projects were around very much about, hey, inventory because we're chasing supply chain with COVID, inventory because we're inaccurate and we're disappointing customers. But most of those, the serial number gets dropped off to account because the architecture discussion didn't happen with the EPC project. They were disconnected. Yeah. And I think the learning for me over the years has been, if you don't bring the serial number through the enterprise, there's a point where it doesn't matter if you had the serial number or not. You're fixing, you're putting a bit of a Band-Aid on a problem, but you're not able to rectify the problem because it's not going into your forecast because you're dumping off the intelligence that you had and converting it to just a zero or a +1 or -1. And so I think that's the biggest learning over the years for me is Serialization is an enterprise transformation project. I spent a lot of time at NRF talking with a lot of the enterprise companies on forecasting and WMS and ERP systems. And I was asking this, hey, how's your company thinking about serialization? And everybody's like, don't know if we have that discussion, and that person's definitely not here, but let's follow up.
Yeah.
And so, even me just kind of poking the bear a little bit, it's kind of like, hey, we got to do a better job of raising the awareness on this. And so I think, kudos to you and Matt for pulling this together, because I think it's a discussion that kind of sneaks up on people. But I think it's a really important discussion, because I think our future of product identity, whether it's barcodes or RFID or something else, is in a serialized world. It won't be a Big Bang Theory. Everything won't happen at the same time. Things will happen at different speeds. But if it starts happening, it's going to happen across the supply chain, because we can't run multiple protocols very well for very long.
Yeah. Yeah. When we get this transition, success looks like we don't have a data serialization project or a 2D barcode project or an RFID project. They're woven into the factory. Nobody has UPC projects in companies anymore. It's foundational, like electricity and water come into a house, right? It's foundational. We're just not there yet. We got to get enough case studies where people say, this is just going to be all like electricity. We got to make the investment for the infrastructure to be able to do this. Then the use cases make it much easier, because right now every project seems it's plowing new ground, I think.
It is, but gosh, you triggered my memory, which is getting harder to do these days. I believe you and I actually sat on a supply chain steering committee, cross-functional, years ago with Ken Boyd and some different folks from other partners in the supplier space, and we talked about what barcodes should be used in the supply chain on cases and what types of things should we be doing, and it became an influencing community. And I think we've lost a lot of those communities over the years. And that might be something that we need to try to resurrect with partnership from GS1 and AIM and the grocery, GMA. Those groups, I think, have a lot of power to pull teams together, but I think having willing participants in the teams to have the discussion and get people to sit around the table and talk about it once or twice a year is really powerful. And I think we've lost a little bit of that over the years. So maybe it's time we resurrect some history around that.
Well, we were on a call this morning, and I can't tell you who I was on the call with, because that would be inappropriate, but it was all about the Food Safety Modernization Act 204, which basically says by 2026 with food, you've got to have traceability and identification, et cetera. And it's all the way through the supply chain. And everybody was like, well, everybody can do it their own way. I go, well, that makes no sense at all. I mean, if you're going to do this, I would think people like Chipotle and McDonald's and Walmart and Kroger and et cetera would all get in a room and go, what's the best way to do this? It's all lock arms and say, that's the best way to do this. That's not collusion. That's not antitrust. It's creating a standard way things happen, because then adoption by the supplier community and collaboration makes much more easy versus everybody's going to try to do it their own way. I agree with you. I think there has been there's been a lot of really great standards, but there hasn't been a lot of, hey, there's a lot of standards that gives us a lot of choices, but how are we going to execute the FSMA work for 2004 across the retail supply chain? I think everybody's going to kind of struggle with that.
Yep.
Myron, as always, wonderful job. Thank you so much. It's always enjoyable to touch base with you. Any parting thoughts? Any ways that your company can help some of the companies who are struggling with it?
Well, we're always willing to help. I think I'll part with this thing I think you'd asked me about in our pre-discussion. On my website, I have this quote around open input and debate are critical elements to creating strategic direction of a business. But more importantly, if we all around the table agree, then most of us aren't necessary.
Great point.
And I think sometimes we find ourselves in meetings where it's kind of like, yeah, I don't want to create any friction. I don't necessarily agree, but I don't want to be that person. And I think we've got to have the boldness to be able to ask questions and challenge each other and have an active professional debate. It's not personal. It's not full disagreement. It's just, hey, is this the right thing? Hey, are we thinking about this? what are we going to do? Why are we getting rid of this data? What are we going to do when we need it? That helps people make better decisions and better planning. And that's, part of the name of my company is Divergent, because we try to think about things differently. We think more with the end in mind versus the initial project or the bogey on the P&L to go get. We want to get those things, but we want to help people do it in a way that helps set them up for the future and not adds cost of rework or tech debt as they go down the pathway. So always happy to help. Sometimes it's just lending an ear and listening to people or giving them like, hey, why would you think of it that way type of challenge. But I think a lot of these things, these will be solved in collaboration with smart groups and people who want to be leaders in the space, or maybe some have a tremendous amount of serialized inventory in their stores, and they're trying to figure out, wait, why am I not realizing as much value as I expected? Well, how are you treating the data? And usually that's a question that yields a lot of fruit. So it's always a pleasure, Mike. And Matt, thank you all for the time. And to the audience, thank you all for attending and all the things you do. And if we can help in any way, we're certainly happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Matt and Myron. I appreciate it very much. Incredible discussion, and it will not be the last time we have a discussion with you. It's always provocative. It's thinking through it. It's challenging our thinking. And to your point, there is an opportunity to be disagreeing without being disagreeable, because I think if 10 of us are all in the same room and we all have the same thoughts, then some of us don't need to be here. It's okay to have a conflicting, points of view. And I think that makes us stronger, because I don't think you just take one person's answer and drive down the road with it. So thank you very much, Matt. Thank you very much, Myron. We appreciate it, and appreciate the audience for participating. Take care.